He met him, the doctor met him on a planet, but it wasn't his planet.
Right.
He was from somewhere.
I could have done with knowing that, it might have helped.
I suppose to a degree though, if you're doing the middle story in a trilogy, that's quite a good position because so you've got your luggage to deal with. But meanwhile, you can just tell your own story in the middle and just get...
But what was great was I had someone to write out. Because that suddenly meant that I had a destination, an emotional destination for the story, as opposed to simply providing the Doctor with a problem and then having the Doctor solve the problem and then returning to the same equilibrium. You don't want a story to return to the same equilibrium because in that case, why bother even having the story? So the fact that I could write out both Romana and K9 in the first one, because K9, I think K9 had to go for all kinds of reasons, one of which was that his radio controls interfered with the setups of the cameras, and every time the cameras were interfered with, they had to do a lineup, and the lineup could take anything up to 40 minutes. You know, a lineup was when they basically rebooted the cameras, and sometimes when K9 was too close to a camera or whatever, then suddenly, the output of that camera would go green, and there was no rescuing it. So, for purely economic reasons, I think K9 had to go, but also a story.
But I think also, he'd been in it for, this would be the fourth season, wouldn't it? Which is longer than a companion would last, just over what most of the companions do. So kind of it's time of, well, we've had that, and now we shouldn't anymore, because the programme changes, and that's why it's been going for so long. So.
See, I think if you did K9 now, then you wouldn't do K9. What you'd do is you'd do K9 as something like Siri, who could transfer from one device to another, and wherever you are, if there's a connection, then K9 is there.
It's there.
But the idea of an actual mobile robot dog seems awfully retro.
No, that's the good. You should do this for a living. They should really pick this up. Right. So, I was wondering, how would I do this? We'll stick to Warriors Gate before asking. I was going to ask you about getting commissioned for 10 minutes, but obviously, when you asked to do the book of Warriors Gate straight away, did that come as a sort of job lot?
Yeah, I mean, what Chris said to me was you have the option of turning over your scripts to Terence Dix for novelising. And by that time, I'd already novelised my independent radio serial, and actually had managed to blag that up into a trilogy of novelisations, and I then got back to the radio station and blagged the radio serial up into a trilogy of serials. So, yeah, I was on a bit of a roll, it's got to be said. So I said, well, no, I'll do my own. And so, this was about midway through the development period, so we hadn't got to the point yet where the script had been sort of turned into a shooting script. We certainly hadn't got as far as shooting. So when I did the deal with W.H. Allen Style Books to do the book, I went to my own drafts, and I wrote the novelisation virtually from the first draft, the first radio draft that I'd written. Which was great because, bear in mind, it was an overwritten radio-style script, which meant it had all the detail in it that a book needs. It hadn't had the details stripped out yet, so you didn't have this bare and spare document. You had quite a rich document to work from. And it made an unusually long novelisation. I think it was about 10,000 words longer than the usual Terence Dix output. But my editor, Christine Doniger at W.H. Allen, who is now she's now a French translator, and she is responsible for what is currently the definitive English translation of Les Miserables, which so we all, everybody from that period has an arc, and that was hers. And she went to her production staff and said, we've got this overlong novelisation, but she says, I really like it, I think it's really good, can we go longer on this one? So there are cost implications for a publisher when you exceed the page count, and they agreed to exceed the page count, at which point the manuscript was sent to the production office, and John Nathan Turner blocked it and said, no, it's not enough like the TV script, because by this time all the other stuff had gone on. So I was put in the position of having to really cut and paste my manuscript for the book into something that more resembled the script that Paul Joyce and Christopher Bidney had cut down from my original. And that was quite a painful process. And bear in mind that this was pre-computers. Chris Bidmead had one of the first word processors that I'd ever heard of or seen. I certainly didn't have one. All my stuff was being done on the big electric typewriter I bought with my first sale. So when you cut and paste, in those days, you cut and you pasted, and you destroyed the original. So the only copies of the original Warriors Gate book were the ones at W.H. Allen and the one at the BBC, and my copy got completely destroyed. And John Nathan Turner raised an eyebrow when he saw the rewritten version, because it still had a lot of my original writing approach in it. But he passed it this time and he let it go through. And then, of course, years later, the lost version sort of became a little bit legendary, because the BBC's version disappeared and never turned up. W.H. Allen were taken over, and then the company was taken over again and has gone through various iterations, and the original manuscript that I delivered there, the Xerox, has gone missing. So there was no copy of that anywhere in the world. So, and it would have stayed legendary were it not for the fact that BBC Audio showed an interest in doing a reconstructed version. So, Easter before last, I sat down and I got my original first draft, which I had kept, and I got the novelisation last draft, which I still had, and an envelope of all the stuff that I'd cut out the first time around, and then a few more bits and pieces from different other drafts to go out. And I found I'd been surprisingly methodical back then. I'm not really that methodical now, I've got quite lazy, but I kind of not only kept everything, but and the stuff that I couldn't identify where it went, if I held the tip of its pages up to the light, I could more or less read the original text through and reconstruct that. So I'd say what I did for BBC Audio that came out, read by John Colshaw earlier this year, that I'd say is a good 95% of that original take on the novelisation.
Well, actually, when I did the BBC Audio version, I then read the original book. Just straight away. No, just, I mean, that was before I knew I was doing this. And I just went, I wanted just to see, because then that's in my head, I want to look at this. And I got asked afterwards, well, and I went, they're exactly the same and completely different. Because the way it's, you go like, well, that happens, and that it happens in both of them, but not in the same way, but it's still there, it still happens. And I sort of go, and then you look at the TV show, and I find it fascinating that none of the three cliffhangers from the TV show are in the book. Like they're in the TV, but you go, yeah, but at the same time, nothing feels missing. It's just that the moments aren't the same. The actual voyage is the same.
You could do your head in.
I think it may have done.
Yeah. Explains a lot.
But I'm really pleased that it exists now, because as you say, it has become legendary. People I want to see what that version was like.
Yeah, of course, yeah. There's always a danger that it will get built up in people's minds, and then when they finally see what it is, oh, is that all it was about?
Oh, it's spoken about that for years. So that, you were doing that alongside working on Warriors Gate. How quickly after Warriors Gate did any suggestion of you doing another Doctor Who script come along?
I got very drunk and wrote a letter to John Nathan Turner expressing my dissatisfaction with the way that Warriors Gate had gone. And my agent saw it and says, I would never let a writer send that. And I don't know, sent it. And to his enormous credit, John Nathan Turner kind of let it roll over him and invited me to resubmit for not the next season, but the next season after that. And
not unless they would have done a few years later. I think he got less easygoing.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he just liked Terminus. I don't know, but I think there were, because it was that first year of stuff, and there was so much contention going on, and I think to a certain extent maybe he agreed with me, with some of the complaints that I had, and had looked to address them. So I did get, I got a second commission, and really enjoyed doing it. I know Warriors Gate is the one that everybody talks about now, and Terminus, both of mine, everybody hated them when they went out. more or less, you know. I mean, Warriors Gate, what the hell was that about? What was this guy smoking when you wrote it? And then Terminus, oh, you know, not as good as Warriors Gate. Was
People have got to get used to something that's different. First of all, they go,
I mean, classic Who is like fine wines, it has to be left to mature, and the older you get, the more you appreciate them.
So, was it Eric Saylor that who actually commissioned you for?
It was. I mean, it was John's sort of initiative, and Eric came in, and Eric was a completely different kettle of fish to Chris. Eric had done he'd done a story, which I think was what landed him the job, and it was a period story. And I always remember him telling me that when it came to ratings, it was the historical Doctor Who's that drew more viewers than the out there science fiction stuff. And he'd gone in with one of those with some success, and got the script editor's job. I don't know. You see, now they have a script editor's training course in the BBC, and I always had this theory about script editors at that period, which was that they fell into two camps. There were the producers on their way up, so it was people who were learning the ropes and were going on to better things. So producers on their way up, or writers on their way down. And I don't know, that's probably a bit unkind, but I always felt that to be a writer and to accept a script editing job was more or less to put your own career to one side. And given that writers, as I said before, tended not to socialise, tended not to meet, tended not to have much to do with one another, when you've got a writer who is a script editor dealing with a writer, there's kind of no language between the two of you. There should be, because you're both in the same profession. But at that time, there was no kind of easy way of communicating. It was, I suppose it was a competitive situation. You get these two writers together, and because it's not a writer's room, but it's individual craftspeople kind of vying to have their point of view come first, then it was an awkward situation. And when it came to the end of the season and after Terminus, I kind of got my mojo back for Doctor Who, and I thought, I do like doing this. The dissatisfactions that I had on Warriors Gate have kind of been dispelled. This was a better experience. And I submitted a new story, and I got a note back from Eric saying, Steve, you've sent us another $1 million movie and we just can't afford to do them. Thanks, but no thanks.
And is this the one that Big Finish?
It is, yeah.
Nightmare Country.
Nightmare Country, yeah. Guy Adams got in touch with me after I'd done the Warriors Gate revamp, and said, would you be interested in doing a Big Finish? And I remembered the amount of work that went into doing Who, and all my stuff is in the City Archive in Hull, because Hull University Drama Department is my old alma mater, and I asked them if they would want my old papers, and they said yeah. So all my working papers for Doctor Who and everything else are in the City Archive between Philip Larkin and Alan Plater in the shelving. It's fantastic. And, but going through those papers to send them back, the sheer number of pages and the number of kind of treatments and outlines and rewrites, and this is before anything was submitted to the BBC. This was just for me working the ideas up. Tremendous amount of work went into that. And I remembered how much work went into it, and I said, I'd love to, Guy, but it's my living now, and I can't really take that much time out to do an audio because I know what Big Finish money's like. And Big Finish, they do pay, they pay a fair rate, but it is largely a labour of love to do one for them. So I had to say pass on that, and then after a while I thought, hang on, I've been going through all these papers, and I got Nightmare Country out again. And of course I'd done all the work. All the work that went into that treatment was all the work that was needed for the final thing. And okay, I've been writing it for TV, but bear in mind that radio was my school in the early days. So it was kind of like going back to my origins. I can write for audio without any problem whatsoever. Creating sound worlds and creating soundscapes. I kind of You know, that's in the blood and it's in the veins. So I said, do you think they'd be interested? And he said, I think they'd bite your hand off. And so I submitted it, and David Richardson read it, and you know, all but bit my hand off. And it was a really great experience because it was a dream to write, because it was like collaborating with this younger guy who's got all the energy and who's prepared to put the hours in.
Did the June guy one? The guy spectated it?
No, it was the younger guy I'm talking about is me.
Oh, sorry.
Me at 24 or whatever it was.
I'm too old to have worked that out, yes, I've just caught up with you there.
Having said that, yes. You know, Guy is a younger guy, and he is a guy, so I can understand the confusion. But no, it was a dream to do it, and I went along for part of one of the recording days, and it was really strange because when I did my stuff with you know, my circle of friends in independent radio, the way we did it was, we didn't have a drama studio. What we had was just the facilities at the independent radio studio. So it was a commercial production studio. So what Pete Baker, the guy who was handling all the technical stuff, did was he recorded everybody's voice clean. Everybody had a separate mic. No special effects, no background atmos, no nothing. Just an absolutely clean voice recording of all the performances. And then I always remember he got all the sound effects and put them on those old 8-track cartridges that the DJs used with all the stings and the sound effects and the commercials. So they're instant start when you hit them. He put all the sound effects on these cartridges, played the clean voice tape through the deck, put the echo or the reverb or whatever atmosphere he needed onto live as it went through, and then hit the special effects on spot. So he did a live mix of a clean voice tape. And when I went along to Big Finish, they have all these booths, which kind of like medieval coffins. And everybody goes in their own booth, and their mic's up, and they have their own headphones. And each vocal performance is recorded on a separate track, and everything else is done in a subsequent mix. All of the background, all of the sound effects, all of the atmospheres are all mixed in afterwards, almost as if, you know, like a prog rock record almost. And it was weird because that was exactly the way Pete used to do. But in the interim, I'd worked on radio at the BBC where I went along, and they were still doing it the way they'd done it in the 1930s. You know, they were all with their scripts around one microphone, with somebody in the background with a tray of gravel to walk on and do, or pouring out a glass of water or slamming a door. And they had, I mean, the studio was about the size of this room here, and there would be an area over here with a parquet floor, and an area over there with a carpet, and a set of stairs over there. They had all these things, yeah, and they could do all of this stuff kind of live in the studio. And so it was like, I had a glimpse of the future, I'd gone back to the 30s, and then finally, you know, doing Big Finish, I'd come home again.
I have been given the get off sign, so but I would ask you very quickly, could you tell us what else you're doing at the moment?
Well, of course, the thing about a writer is you're always working, and then every now and again you sell something. And what I've developed an international show for a German producer, which we took to Series Mania in Lille earlier this year. So he's putting together the production package for that, and that will start with a tremendous explosion in the Alps, and then have an investigation that spreads all across Europe. And I'm doing something with Bukeko Pictures in New Zealand, which is owned by the guys who set up Weta Workshop. And it's a historical thing. I can't say too much about it, but it's set in the South Seas, and it will be huge special effects, but not science fiction special effects. Think of Game of Thrones with Maoris.
That's one of those one-line pitches, isn't it? Just give me your pitch. Game of Thrones, your one. Well, I'm not going anywhere with Game of Thrones. We have reached our terminus. That's even worse. I'm sorry we didn't get Q&A audience question times, but Stephen is here for the rest of the day. Go and annoy him and ask him questions. make his day hell. I mean, go and converse with Stephen and have a lovely time
I'm yours
chatting
for the
to
day.
him. And you're signing later next one.
I'm signing right now about the...
So if you missed your chance to ask him anything, which you just did, go and see him. Sorry.
And there's no charge for my signings, by the way, because usually when people come along, it's something they bought anyway, so I've already had your money, so...
Foreman or the queue. I've been absolutely delighted to talk to Stephen Gallagher. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. One more time, please, for Robert and Stephen Gallagher. Now, changes are afoot. You know this piece of paper you were given when you walked in, which told you what was going to happen, all during the day? Well, it's changed. It is not set in stone. We have had to swap the last two guests around. So, at 1600 or 4 o'clock, for those of us in Imperial time, it will be Sarah Sutton, and at 1640, it will be Michael E. Bryant. Don't ask Sarah Sutton what it was like directing the Sea Devils, and don't ask Michael E. Bryant how he found playing Nissa. They just won't. They'll